started with me tying my apron around my waist, ready to face another busy night at the diner. I wasn't expecting much, just the usual crowd of customers, a few regulars, and maybe the occasional from the table near the window. What I definitely didn't expect was to walk over to a table and see Kai, my ex, sitting there with his new girlfriend, 𝐼𝐸. Her eyes scanned me like I was something she of her shoe, and Kai, he couldn't even meet my gaze. My stomach churned, but I forced a smile onto my face. "What can I get you guys?" I asked, my voice as neutral as I could manage. 𝐼𝐸 smirked, leaning forward on the table. "Do you have any couple specials? You know, for like people in actual relationships." D landed squarely in my fingers tightened around the notepad in my hand as I fought the urge to lash out. Her smug expression made it painfully clear that she was enjoying this. I was so close to saying something, doing something, when I felt a warm hand snake around my waist. A deep voice, rich and velvety, murmured in my ear, "I'll see you out back in a minute, baby." Startled, I glanced up and found myself looking into the deep brown eyes of a handsome, dark-haired guy I'd never seen before. His gaze held mine for a moment before he looked over at Kai and 𝐼𝐸. The tension in the air thickened as his brushed against my neck in a possessive, deliberate gesture. Kai's eyes widened in shock, his face paling. "Oh, yes, yeah, he stammered, completely thrown off. The stranger didn't even spare him a glance as he turned his attention back to 𝐼𝐸. "And I suggest you two both leave. Seems like you're causing my girlfriend unnecessary stress." His arm tightened around my waist, anchoring me to him. "I'm not gonna leave just because some random guy is telling me to." Kai back, his voice with defiance, though he avoided looking directly at me. The stranger poked his into his cheek, shaking his head slowly, almost amused. "Wrong move, buddy," he said, cracking his knuckles. "I suggest you leave before I take you outside myself." His words carried a weight that made even 𝐼𝐸 shift in her seat. He glanced at me and winked, his confidence and protectiveness washing over me in waves. For the first time in weeks, I felt like someone had my back. Kai muttered something under his breath, pulling 𝐼𝐸's hand. "Let's go," he said, standing up abruptly. She looked like she wanted to argue, but the tension in the air made her twice. With one last glare at me, she grabbed her bag and followed him out. The stranger's hand slid from my waist, and I turned to face him fully. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly from D. He smiled, a small tilt to his. "Just a guy who seen pretty girls get." "You don't even know me," I replied, though a small part of me couldn't deny the flutter in my chest. "True," he said, leaning casually against the counter, "but I'd like to." I crossed my arms, trying to regain some of control. "And what makes you think I'm interested?" His grin widened. "Because you haven't asked me to leave yet." I rolled my eyes but couldn't help the small smile that crept onto my face. "Fine. What's your name, mystery hero?" "JIMIN," he said, offering his hand. "And you?" "𝐃𝐢𝐬𝐜," I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and just a second longer than necessary. "Well, 𝐃𝐢𝐬𝐜, looks like your shift just got a little more interesting," JIMIN said, his eyes sparkling with mischief. I shook my head, laughing softly despite myself. Maybe the night wasn't going to be so bad after all. The diner buzzed around us, but for a moment, it felt like it was just me and JIMIN in our own little bubble. His confident grin tugged at something deep inside me, and I couldn't help but feel intrigued by the stranger who had swooped in like a knight in a leather jacket. "All right, JIMIN," I said, stepping back a little to create some distance, though my cheeks felt warm. "Thanks for the rescue, but I've got a shift to finish." JIMIN tilted his head, watching me with a look that felt a little too perceptive for my liking. "Fair enough. Don't let me keep you." He moved to sit at the counter, tapping his fingers rhythmically against its surface. "But I'm not leaving yet." I raised an eyebrow, trying to suppress a grin. "You planning to order something or just sit there all night?" "Depends," he replied smoothly. "What's the best thing on the menu?" I sighed, grabbing my notepad again. "If you are staying, at least let me do my job. You a burger or a pancake guy?" "Surprise me," he said, leaning back like he had all the time in the world. I walked away, feeling his gaze follow me as I prepped his order. Despite myself, I found my into a smile. By the end of my shift, JIMIN was still there. He had worked his way through a double cheeseburger and a slice of pie, keeping me entertained with light. Whenever I had a spare moment, he had a way of making me laugh, his charm through the fatigue of a long night. As the clock struck midnight and the last customers trickled out, I wiped down the counter. "All right, JIMIN," I said, him a look. "Closing time." He stood up, sliding his jacket over his shoulders. "Let me walk you home." I blinked, caught off guard. "What? No, it's fine. I've done this a million times." JIMIN frowned slightly, his easygoing demeanor slipping into something more serious. "It's late, 𝐃𝐲𝐬𝐿. Humor me." His concern felt genuine, and I didn't have the energy to argue. "Fine," I muttered, grabbing my bag, "but only because I'm too tired to you on it. The walk home was quiet, the streets bathed in the soft glow of street lights. Jimin kept a respectful distance, his hands shoved into his pockets as he matched my pace. "So," he said after a while, "what's the story with your ex?" I sighed, the question pulling at a sport. Long story short, we dated for a year, he cheated, and now he's spreading around with 𝐃𝐢𝐬𝐜𝐥𝐚 like he's the king of the world. Jimin's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything right away. Finally, he said, "Sounds like an idiot." I laughed, a bitter edge to the sound. "Yeah, well, I guess I have a thing for idiots." He stopped walking, and I turned to face him. "Hey," he said softly, his voice steady. "Don't let some like him make you think you're not worth more. You deserve better." His words, me, than I expected, and for a moment I couldn't speak. "Thanks," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. Jimin smiled, the tension easing from his face. "Anytime, beautiful." Over the next few weeks, Jimin became a regular at the diner. He'd show up during my shifts, always sitting at the counter with that same easy smile. He never pushed, never demanded anything from me, but his presence was steady, comforting. Slowly, I found myself opening up to him, sharing bits and pieces of my life, and in return, he shared his. He was a mechanic, loved old cars, and had a knack for fixing things, broken engines, busted locks, even my mood on the worst days. One evening, after the diner had closed, we sat outside on the curb, sharing a milkshake. The stars were bright overhead, and the air was cool and crisp. "You know," Jimin said, his voice low, "I didn't just step in that night because I stepped in because I saw you, and I couldn't stand the thought of you being." I looked at him, my heart thudding in my chest. "Jimin." He turned to me, his gaze soft but intent. "I like you, 𝐃𝐢𝐬𝐜, and I know you've been through a lot, but I want to be the guy who makes you smile, who shows you what it's like to be cared for." Tears at the corners of my eyes, and I laughed softly, shaking my head. "You're something else, you know that?" "Is that a yes?" he asked, a lilt to his voice. I leaned in, a soft, to his cheek. "It's a maybe," I whispered. Jimin grinned, his hand finding mine and giving it a gentle squeeze. "I'll take it." And in that moment, under the stars with Jimin by my side, I felt like maybe, just maybe, the best was yet to come.